Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon. Who's conducting?
Hi, Vasudha. Hi, Vasudha. How are you?
Good. Nice to see you, even if it's
Same here.
virtual world.
Yes, but it's so nice to see you.
Yeah, that's
I'm
true.
looking forward to look at you.
I don't know. I'm a bit out of touch, a bit rusty, as they say. Anyhow.
No,
Okay.
I'm sure it's not like that, and I will have a wonderful lecture.
Okay. Shall we
Because the
start?
kind of experience you have in teaching this. So,
Okay.
Yeah, can we start? I don't know.
I think we should start because I don't have too much time. I mean, there's only 45 minutes.
Yeah, Soumya Seema is here. Yeah, Soumya Seema, it's a very short time anyway we have. And I'm to blame for that.
No,
I'm so sorry
there's
about
no blame. There's no
giving you
blame.
such a
It's
short
just
time.
good. It's good for the students. Don't worry. I think they are quite happy.
Snigdha will coordinate today's talk, so Snigdha, you can start.
Good afternoon to everyone. My name is Snigdha Mehra, and I welcome you to the first talk by the History Department of Lady Shri Ram College for Women for the session of 2021-22. Our talk is on women and the French Revolution with our eminent speaker, Dr. Vasudha Pande. We welcome you here. Dr. Vasudha Pande is a retired associate professor at the Department of History, Lady Shri Ram College, University of Delhi. She had completed her master's from Jawaharlal Nehru University in History of Modern India in 1983 and had gotten her PhD from University of Delhi in the year 2000. Dr. Vasudha Pande has worked on a history of modern Kumaun, but has also complemented this with extensive research on far western Nepal. She has written on the divergent historiographies of the Gorkha rule in Kumaun and far western Nepal, on the Gorkha State, folk traditions of Kumaun, and also on the issue of borderlands, Kumaun, far western Nepal, and western Tibet. Before we ask Dr. Pande to take the stage, I would like to request everyone to switch on their cameras if possible. Also, kindly keep yourself muted in the duration of the talk. Once we open the floor for questions, you can choose to unmute and put forward your questions or write them in the chat box for us to take them up on your behalf. Dr. Pande, would you like to take the stage?
Thank you. I have, as I said, I'm a bit rusty, but let's start. You people, this talk is, I suppose, for a large number of students across disciplines who study European history, as well as I think for some of the BA program students, there's a special paper which has a unit on this. What I would like to talk about is clearly, I don't have too much time, so I think maybe I should start with my presentation. I have a PPT with some images, so let me share that with you. Share present now. Okay, just 1 minute. Hold on. I don't want to share my entire screen. I seem to be. How do I reach this? Sorry, I seem to have forgotten how to use this. I haven't done it for some time. Just hold on.
Ma'am, we can also present on your behalf.
Yeah, but you don't have the copy of that, no? Maybe
yes.
Okay, just hold on. Let me just see if I can do it. Just hold on. I'll just ask my. Just sharing. Okay, wait. Screen.
Yes, ma'am. It's presenting.
You can see it? I can't see it. Okay. Is it presenting? Okay.
It exited all of a sudden. Your presentation went off. I guess something glitched.
Oh, okay. Just hold on. Then let's do it again. A window. I'm putting it only through a window. Just one minute. Meenakshi, can you just help me to share my PPT? I don't know. Stop, I will do it. I think always do it. It's this one. It's a French Revolution. It's this one.
You have to share it, or can you just share your screen?
Yeah.
And open the PPT.
Yeah. No, but then I can't see them, no? Okay. I can't see you as a consequence, but
Yeah,
okay. It doesn't matter.
that's one of the problem with Google Meet, that if you open it completely on your screen, then you can't see.
Okay, doesn't matter. I
us.
hope I will not lose your attention. That's all, because that's very precious for me. Okay. So let's start with, I assume that you know something about French society and French history, and quite a lot, hopefully, about the revolution. I think I do not want to assume too much also, but basically, yeah, what's happened? Yeah, hello?
I'm so sorry, but your screen is presenting the Google Meet. It's not presenting your PPT.
Okay. Okay, I think let's do it just like that. Then what else to do? Just hold on. Present now. Let me see. I mean, let's go video.
You just you present the screen, share the screen, the present screen, and open your just PPT.
Okay.
And just see the PPT. Don't look at. Don't open the Google Meet screen.
Oh, okay.
So then the Google Meet will be reflected on this share.
Just hold on. I think I have been doing this. I mean, I've done quite a few talks like this, but I don't know why this. Actually, Google Meet ka problem hai. Okay, wait, just let's see now. Can you see?
Yeah, now it's coming. So you have to minimize. You have to minimize the Google Meet screen and keep the PPT on in front, means on the screen.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm minimizing mine. Okay.
Yeah.
I've done that. Can you see? The?
Yes.
The
Now,
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Now it's coming.
Okay. So maybe what we should discuss then is, one is that all of us know that the French Revolution was one of the main events in the history of the modern world. It has been considered so, and it has had an evolving historiography, which is very long term, and it's going on today. The very famous quotation by Mao, that he said that the French Revolution had not ended as yet. So I think somewhere we have to keep thinking about what happened, because in a sense, this understanding of the modern world, which is premised on liberalism, on liberty, equality, fraternity, and please remember that B.R. Ambedkar, for example, was one of the Indian scholars who really reiterated these values, particularly of liberty, equality, fraternity. As a matter of fact, I think he was one of the main scholars of the colonial period who talked about it. And I think there is a lot for us to be understood for that, particularly for modern historians. But the French Revolution itself was not one revolution. It was not one thing that happened in 1789. As you, as students of historians, must have realized that revolutions are ongoing. They keep changing, they are evolving. Historical study is about this. And many of you who have studied this will realize that there are also phases of the revolution. So the revolution itself is not something which happened once and then it got fossilized, it kept changing. And these phases of the movement is extremely important for us to understand. And as a matter of fact, I think what I will be discussing when I talk about women in the French Revolution, then we will see the changing faces of the revolution itself. I think that's the important point. The contingent aspect of it. And of course, as students of history, we also realize that there is a changing historiography, which is extremely important to be understood, and the historiography is ongoing. Let me tell you that I haven't taught Europe for some years now, actually. But interestingly, what I found was that when I was asked to give this lecture, I looked at and there's fresh material. There's very interesting fresh material. So remember that when we research something, we must always be looking at, and every time you look at new work, it makes the understanding of the event. This event happened so many years ago, yet a nuancing of that event itself is an important part of the historiographical tradition. So let me start with the period before the French Revolution, because we can't really understand what happened in the revolution without understanding what French society was like. And let me remind you that this word which I am using here, ancien regime, and the Enlightenments. Ancien regime very clearly is a term which came about after the French Revolution. As soon as the French Revolution happened, the revolutionaries believed that they had made something new. Something had happened which was extremely transformative, and this was new. And therefore, what had preceded this was called the ancien regime, the regime before. So the ancien regime is a term which was coined by the revolutionaries themselves. So we look at how to study the ancien regime and the Enlightenment. And I'm not using a singular term. I would say that there were French revolutions. I would say there were enlightenments. I hope you understand the significance of this plurality, because we're not talking about one event. We're looking at a series of events. And as we know, postmodern theory doesn't really appreciate the singular in that case. And maybe we can have a discussion on that if you want. But I always refer to these things in the plural. Now, when we look at what was happening within the Enlightenment and in the ancien regime, we find that there is a very interesting discussion in the 18th century about the role of women in society. And interestingly, there's a very important discussion about the role of women in terms of education, women's literacy, and of course, about women's larger role in the public domain. Remember that there was a difference between aristocratic women and ordinary women. I hope you know that there were the three orders which were then eventually banned by the revolution. The three estates, as they were known, the first, second, and third estate. And women of the aristocracy were quite different from that of the other orders, particularly that of the third estate. You also know that there were the one estate was the church, in which, very importantly, France being Catholic, had nuns and priests. And I hope you know that once the revolution happened after that, gradually as it radicalized, there was the process of de-Christianization, there was the process of defrocking, as it was called, and I still remember very vividly a cartoon of that period which shows the nuns and the monks hugging each other after these monasteries collapsed. So, interestingly, important kinds of things that we have to understand about the 18th century. But there was one very important kind of institution that comes up in the 18th, around this time, 17th and 18th centuries, and which continues, by the way, into the 19th centuries, which is called the salon. And the salon was a space where interestingly, again, it's important to understand that in 18th century society, there was a new class of people who were coming up, who were wealthy, but who were not members of the nobility. I hope you know that in the French Revolution, people could buy nobility when they became wealthy. And this, of course, if you bought a kind of noble status, you still had to have the other accomplishments of the nobility, the etiquette of the nobility. So very clearly, much of this was happening through the salons. The salons were importantly spaces where women were in charge. Women ran such salons. Salons, they ran. Say the word "ran" is maybe not so correct. That they managed these salons and they were known for their salons. So very bright women who were very well versed in aristocratic tastes and sort of etiquette and manners, but also women who were reading. The salons were spaces where men and women met and where, as I told you, the new class was getting indoctrinated into how to be aristocratic. And so you can see that one of the images you have in front of you is a reading in the salon of Madame Geoffrin, 1755. Okay, so you can understand the culture and the context of this period through this salon. Of course, let me remind you that women of different estates had different roles to play. One very interesting thing that is developing in this context is, how do I change this here? Hold on. Okay, so now we look at this at the aristocratic women. Another important part about aristocratic women, of course, was that the nobility and the courtiers were sort of, lived in a world of their own. Versailles, as you know, was away from Paris. It was a place, it was a palace which had been built by Louis XVI, and there was a lot of, shall we say, entertainment and celebration that happened there. And the aristocratic classes spent much of their time, and particularly the women of the aristocratic classes, were running after fashions, the hat, the trimming of the clothes, luxury goods, and of course, quite a few scandalous affairs, etc., also went on. And the other interesting part of this was that they were rather alienated from their own society in that context because they lived far away from them. And women here very often, and this is important to remember, because they were so keen on social engagements, very often the children were left with wet nurses, and women did not feed their own children. And there was a very interesting kind of imagery that sort of develops through the 18th century about aristocratic women, that they are not natural, that they are not mothers. And this is something we will pick up later on. Remember this, because about the saloniers and about aristocratic women, there was a critique that was already emerging about it. So, however, when we look at this society outside Versailles and a society which is not in the estates or in the people of the third estate, people who are working on the farms, etc., who are not living off frontier income, then we find that there was a lot of shortages that were happening in the 1770s and 1780s. And this is a very interesting story. I mean, as you can see, I don't have to explain this. Women in that period, and this is something which was happening in the medieval world, and this is a sort of takeover from there, that women were in charge of feeding their children, of their families. And somewhere there was a kind of moral economy which worked, which allowed women to take recourse to even rioting if they could not feed their children. So this was something which was sanctioned by society, that since women had to feed children, they could do what they thought was appropriate, take action. So the flour was, as you can see, is for flour. You can see the sacks of flour that are sort of being slashed into, and people are picking up the grain and taking it away. And you can see there are a large number of women with children in that. So again, there were major bread shortages. So contrast these kind of images. We have two kinds of images of the ancien regime, of flour wars, bread shortages, and of course, look at this. And again, women are very much part of this scene here. They are in charge of providing food and nourishment, nurture. It's not the man who is the head of the household who's providing. Okay, please remember that changes with the advent of the capitalist economy. Here we are having a transition. So, and this is something which I would like you to understand. European women had a long tradition of rioting when they suspected speculators of hoarding food to drive up prices. Authorities seldom arrested the women rioters. French women's food riots, called taxation populaire, typically involved crowds seizing merchandise from shopkeepers and grocers, distributing it equally to the crowd at what they determined was a just price, and then returning proceeds to the merchants. So you can see women had agency and they expressed it. Now this image is a very enlarged image of a strong woman in the food riots. And so look at the kind of drawing. That in itself you can see this is not sort of the kind of femininity which we associate with women post-revolution, or as I would say it, in the capitalist economic world. However, now when we come to the events of the French Revolution, we go beyond this. And of course, maybe I should talk a little more about the Enlightenment before I go on to this. The Enlightenment, as many of you may know, Enlightenment was in the 18th century a very kind of it was a development which emerged from printing and growing literacy. Printing, as you know, had come in the 16th century, and that had changed Europe drastically. And now there was the Republic of Letters in the 18th century. And the Enlightenment, with Diderot, you had the whole thing about the encyclopedia, knowledge, and of course, very clearly talking about reason, rationalism, and gathering of more and more knowledge. So the encyclopedia became an important thing. And here it was here that we can locate the salons and women's participation there. Women also participated now when we come back to the French Revolution. This is a story which you may know, which is 14th July 1789, which is celebrated as the National Day by the French, and the storming of the Bastille, which was a prisoners' camp where the king kept many of his people who opposed him also. And so the storming of the Bastille was something which was a very major event, which actually led to the sort of decline of the control of the aristocracy and the king and the monarch of France. So here there women were also participated in that. But of course, very clearly, as the events of the French Revolution unfolded, and we know that from July onwards, there was growing unrest, there were riots, there was the Great Fear, there were all major kinds of events that were happening. Then there was the tennis court oath. Some of you may know all those details. And then, of course, we have this important event where I told you the distance between Versailles and Paris. And many of these events were happening in Paris. Please remember, Paris was the epicenter of this, though many of the states, or shall we say the regional state towns were also important, but Paris was clearly the epicenter. So now what happens is that gradually the focus is coming onto the king and, of course, also his family. And so now what happens in October? By October, remember, October is a cold month. And in Europe, winter is severe. And Think of the story of the grasshopper and the ant, and how people have to store food. And if there are food shortages in October, people know that the winter is going to be dire. So in that context, think of the march and see what happens. And we have images of this. There are many more images. All of them can't be downloaded. Some of them I have just picked up, and I think it shows on where they are from. But this was the most impressive demonstration of 7,000 women seeking cheaper bread who walked to Versailles in October 1789 and forced the king and the National Assembly to return to Paris. What is very interesting is that they referred to the king no longer as the monarch, as his highness, etc., but as the baker and the baker's boy, was the son of the monarch. So remember, food and baking, grain, all interlinked. And here, so they bring the baker's boy back from Versailles, where he's living in luxury, to Paris, where he has a palace, but he is now made more accountable for his deeds. And now, in this context, of course, we must also look at how clearly women's agency is being seen through the changing events of from 1789 to, shall we say, 1791, because we seem to have a period of, as you know, that initially it is a limited constitutional monarchy where the king is marginal, but the king, of course, refuses to accept the fact that he is being sort of sidelined. And in this process, you, of course, have the making of a convention, the National Convention, which then makes these laws. And in these laws is very interestingly, and this is a very important concept to remember, citizenship. And I think that the basis of modern society is citizenship. In colonial India, of course, we had a very sad situation where we became modern under colonial dispensation. We were subjects. We were not citizens till 1950, till we were declared a republic. Or maybe you can say, but actually, technically, it would still remain. So remember, citizenship. The French got their citizenship in the 18th century, and the discourse on citizenship is extremely important for us to understand modernity. As you can see, if you look at any of you who want to study international relations, who study politics, etc., know that without that, we cannot live in the modern world. We have to be citizens. If we are not citizens in this world, we are non-entities. We are not. We are persona non grata. So think of this, and this is an important part. And the whole idea in the first phase of the constitutional enactments was the idea of active and passive citizenship. So though women were very active in the revolution, they did not get citizenship. I think this is an important point. They were not considered for citizenship. The discussions didn't come around to them, and women, therefore, were not becoming political subjects. This is a long story, as we all know. If you have read about the suffragette movement, you will know that women in Europe got their citizenship much later than the men of Europe. Of course, in France, very interestingly, you had the Republic, and you had many changes through the 19th century, but women were throughout, in a sense, not part of the public sphere. And we can discuss this in greater length. I don't have too much time. But we find gradually, and as you can see, this image is taken from Alami, which sells it at very exorbitant prices. But now, interestingly, what we find, therefore, is, however, that women do continue to play an important role in this understanding, and women are an integral part of French nationalism, which is also developing in this period. Remember that the French language becomes the dominant language thanks to the French Revolution. There is a standardization of weight, measures, uniformity of all kinds, which comes into the French Revolution. The whole reorganization of the state system, all of that is again something which is there. And here, of course, the French notion of the nation is a woman, liberty, and of course Marianne. The very famous painting by Delacroix about liberty leading the people. And if you look at it very carefully, if you do a little more, just little more research on it, not even very much more, if you just look at images, you realize how clearly the Statue of Liberty in New York is very deeply influenced by the idea of Marianne. Okay, so this is the links are very clearly there with European society and the modern world. However, Marianne is, of course, as you can see, a very sort of kind of angelic, Mary-like figure. After all, the name comes from Mother Mary. But here you also have another kind of class of women, and it's important to talk about them. I hope if for those of you who have read about the French Revolution would know these are the women. Actually, they were it was the men who were without the pants, as it were, and for the men it was for the women it was japon, which was without the petticoats. But here you can see that women are also transforming through the French Revolution in the way they dress, and they're wearing that Phrygian cap, which is the cap of liberty, the cockade, and they are armed. You can see that. So you can see how women are participating in the revolution. And so the French Revolution is unfolding through Marianne and through this images you can see of the sans-jupon. You also have, of course, very interestingly in this period, now you can see clearly that I'm not getting to talking about this at great length about Marie Antoinette and that part of the story where eventually she's guillotined and what happens to her. But she also, in a sense, symbolizes the problems of the revolution. She's the aristocratic woman who goes against nature. So she's seen as unnatural. All aristocratic women are considered not natural. And I think the question we will raise at the end of it is what was natural, but maybe we'll come up with that later. I don't know how much time I have, only 10 minutes. I'm sorry. We wasted a little more extra time. Anyhow, let me try and wrap it up soon. So here you have the clubs. The clubs have come up. Now remember that the French Revolution was based very clearly on the culture of the clubs. There was the Jacobin Club, there was the Girondins, there was the Montagnards didn't have a club, but there was the club of the Jesuits, etc. And here again, very interestingly, women were part of some of the clubs, but eventually women also started their own clubs. Now, as you can understand, clubs is also part of autonomy. It's also part of a thinking, of a process where when you join a club, it's a voluntary act. It's an autonomous act of a woman. I joined this club. I want to be this. So this, as you can see, is a patriotic club with Etta Palm. Etta Palm was a Dutch lady who joined the French Revolution in the excitement. So the nationalist boundaries were not so well defined and sharp as they are today. Today, anybody who even looks like a foreigner, we will start asking them questions. But Etta Palm very much here, and you can see they're all reading, writing, discussing, and if you see the next image, you will see again women participating in a club. Can you see that? There's a person with a chair, there's a treasurer, there's a whole process of the new politics which the French Revolution inaugurated. There, women are very much enacting that same politics in their women's clubs. So it's a very important point to understand how the political culture of the French Revolution was shaping up. And now it is in this context when you can see how women are participating, the working women are participating in one manner, and the literate upper class women are participating in different ways. However, what we find very interesting is that in this whole debate, very clearly, there is the important Declaration of the Rights of Man, which is seen as a testament again of modernity. And the Declaration of the Rights of Man, what does it do? It fashions the human a statement of humanism, of individualism, and but the Declaration of the Rights of Man, there's a debate about whether it should include the human. By human you mean men and women, or is it only for men? But clearly the Declaration of the Rights of Man, there's an ongoing debate within France. It's not something so sharp and polarized as we sometimes assume. There were people on the women's side, but what did happen when the law was passed? The Declaration of the Rights of Man did not include the women. I mean, normally, if you read in the Bible, etc., when the term man is used, it includes the woman. But here now, in this Declaration of the Rights of the modern world, which is the sort of foundational stone of the modern world, women are removed. They are edited, they're deleted. So now we have, of course, a well-read, educated woman, Olympe de Gouges, I don't know that I'm pronouncing it correctly. She talks about the Declaration of the Rights of Women and the female citizen. Females, please note, citizen. Was published in 1791. It is modeled on the Declaration of the Rights of Man. Okay, it is dedicated to Marie Antoinette, who even Olympe de Gouges. Please remember, Olympe de Gouges was part of the revolution, the most detested of women. That this revolution will only take effect when all women become fully aware of their deplorable condition and of the rights they have lost in society. Lost. Please remember, it's important that what they had before is lost. The Declaration of the Rights of Women and of the Female Citizen follows the 17 articles of the Declaration of the Rights of Man. It is like a word for word, it has all the 17 rights and brings in women. And so therefore Camille Nash has almost called it a parody of the original document. Okay, so, I'm just sort of emphasizing one. Woman has the right to mount the scaffold. Marie Antoinette went to the scaffold. She must equally have the right to mount the rostrum. I showed you images of women in the clubs, in the rostrum. They wanted to participate in the National Convention, in the discussions. And let me remind you that women attended all the discussions that happened in the convention, in the galleries. It's like, the public attending the Lok Sabha and listening. So these women not only listened in, very often they gave their comments as well. So remember that this is an important part of the historical unfolding. However, interestingly, I must also tell you that Olympe de Gouges talked about the French Revolution, the Jacobins did, for example, Robespierre, who, as you know, was very important during the terror, they did very clearly support the idea of women, equality. Equality may be the wrong term, of women's complementarity. That's what Robespierre seemed to agree with. And they did even think in terms of looking at marriage, this whole festival of reason, etc. In that, there was the whole idea, because remember, there was also a process of de-Christianization. So in that process of de-Christianization, the idea of divorce, which, as you know, is unthinkable within the Catholic Church, was something which was advocated, and for a temporary while it was even available to women, because then yet we find that gradually, and you all know that the French Revolution had to defend itself not only against the groups who were against it, the counter-revolutionaries within France, who then went and got support from aristocratic groups outside, particularly from Austria, etc. But they also had to defend themselves through war. So remember that women were very much part of that war effort, and there were very many women who wanted to participate in the war. They were often told that they should stay at home and nurse, and nursing is a good thing for women. But there are stories, and these are stories that are coming out in the new historiography. Women did a lot of cross-dressing. So I hope you know this importance of cross-dressing. If you read Shakespeare's plays, then half of them are based on cross-dressed women who dress up as men, and what happens to them. So many of these women did try and join the war through that. So this Revolutionary War was an important part of it. But as gradually the French Republic, after the guillotining of the king, there was a republic, and the republic had a new constitution in which there was no distinction between active and passive citizens, but the republic did not include women as citizens. And gradually, we know that the republic moved towards the terror and the Committee of Public Safety, etc., and the whole process of guillotining then, not only because once you had won the war, you were looking for internal enemies, and the process of guillotining then looked at internal enemies, and even those who had openly supported the French Revolution, now were seen as people who were enemies. And many people were guillotined. You know that eventually Robespierre, of course, went around decimating not his rivals, actually, not that, decimating people whom he thought were not in favor of the continuation of the revolution. So by 1793, not too many years after July 1789, in the autumn of remember, think of it, always autumn. Autumn is a difficult time in Europe. It has always been a difficult time. Of course, with climate change, maybe now it isn't so bad. The autumn of 1793 was a difficult period for politically engaged women. Women's clubs were forbidden. Etapam had to flee to the Netherlands. Other female figures were also persecuted. Madame Roland and Olympe de Gouges ended in the guillotine. Madame Roland was actually very much a part of the revolution, but her husband was declared a renegade, and once he was declared that and he disappeared, she was incarcerated and also guillotined. Now, interestingly, so you can see how the revolution turns on itself and what happens to it, and what happens to some of the women. And I'll try and wind up in 5 minutes. Okay, it won't take too much time. I know you may have a class, but I will have to give me a little extra time. In July 1793, Olympe de Gouges was arrested for having written a document that was against the revolution. She argued that freedom of speech was an illusion. During her trial, she was given no defense attorney, and the leader of the Jacobins, Robespierre, decided her fate. So think of it. It's the revolutionaries who are deciding the fate of these women. And very interesting, we have something which is written by a Parisian who witnessed the guillotining. I hope you know that the guillotining was public. It used to happen. People used to go there. When Marie Antoinette was being guillotined, women were sitting there knitting while she was waiting to be beheaded. And you can see the guillotine here. This is an image of Olympe de Gouges. And so he writes, yesterday at 7 o'clock in the evening, a most extraordinary person who held the imposing title of a woman of letters was taken to the scaffold while all of Paris, while admiring her beauty, knew that she didn't even know her alphabet. She approached the scaffold with a calm and severe expression on her face and forced the guillotine's furies. Same Marie Antoinette also faced the guillotine very calm. which had driven her to this place of torture to admit that such courage and beauty had never been seen before. That woman had thrown herself in the revolution, body and soul, but having quickly perceived how atrocious the system adopted by the Jacobins was, she chose to retrace her steps. She attempted to unmask the villains. She was a playwright, and she used to enact plays also, to unmask the villains through the literary productions which she had printed and put up. They never forgave her, and she paid for her carelessness with her head. Now, as you can see, we have looked at the whole issue of women, but as you all know, we cannot talk about women without men, because somewhere that relationship, and that is what is gender, is about how men and women are constructed, how gender is constructed. And each society, we only now in the world know only patriarchal societies, but patriarchal societies are the gendering process is distinct in each patriarchal society, in each cultural tradition, which means every language tradition has a different way of gendering. Remember, gendering is also very much in the language itself. So this whole process of gendering and what happened to the women who were such important agents of the revolution, what happened to them, and how do we understand this? Maybe before we go on to this, we should look at, I think it's important to understand that the women's clubs actually got the women into a lot of trouble, because this is 1793, and this is the man who actually said ban the women's clubs. And this happened here, and this was passed very easily. There was no debate, no Robespierre, no Condorcet, nobody who would disagree with this resolution, and women's clubs were banned. Women were sort of banned from public life. And what we find very clearly here is, what does he say? Should women, I'm reading the second half, should women gather together in political association? No, because they will be obliged to sacrifice to them more important cares to which nature calls them. And what was nature? Motherhood. It's very interesting that motherhood is supposed to define a woman. And this, as I told you, was something which was consistent within the ancien regime and the post-revolutionary discourse. And as we all know, that motherhood is something which is an ongoing part of women's supposed destiny. Because if sex is destiny, then producing children is an essential part of a woman's reason for living, right? Clearly, the fact that many women could contest that, somebody like Olympe Gouges contested that. She said a woman that is equal, that marriage is a contract, etc., etc. All of that were eventually subsumed within the idea of what is natural and what is not natural. And here we have, of course, I think, all of these debates and all these kind of discourses actually terminated with the Napoleonic Code. What was the Napoleonic Code? Married women returned to the status of permanent legal dependents of men. Women acquired the nationality of their husbands upon marriage. In India, you have the Gotra. Your Gotra changes. Everything changes about you once you get married. In India, we also change the name. Once you get married, you're given a new name in your. So, I mean, it's a complete rebirth for the woman. But she has no sort of independence of her. Women could not participate in lawsuits or serve as witnesses. Please remember. Men were no longer responsible for the support of illegitimate children. Female adultery was punished by imprisonment. The space women could occupy in the new regime was defined as marital, maternal, and domestic. So you had to be married, you had to become a mother. I hope you know that in all societies, if you're married and don't produce a child, then that's the worst fate that can befall you, okay? And nobody asks who is responsible. Women did not have control over property, and their wages went to their husbands. this. So the Napoleonic Code, in a sense, ends this. I know I've left out a couple of slides, but I think I don't have the time for that. Maybe we can raise the issue about how these binaries came to become important, how women denied this political role, and maybe the new historiography if we have time. But I think, in a sense, I've tried to sum up what happened during the revolution, the changes that were happening through the revolution, and that in itself, I suppose, given the time space that we have, I hope it has got through. Any questions? I haven't looked at the chat box, so I would like to. Oh, sorry, I have to stop presenting. Just hold on. Hello? Yeah. Right. Now, I'm sorry I missed out on seeing you, all of you. Yes, I can see Anushka there. Yes, nice to see you, Anushka. Okay. So now, questions. I'm sorry, are there any in the chat box? I'm sure you have not had the time. We've just gone so fast. Oh, there's nothing. No question. Oh, I would like to ask one question if time permits. Shatrupa, you decide. Priyanka. Hi, Priyanka.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon, yes.
Anushka, you can ask your question. Thank you, ma'am. Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon. Hi, Smita.
I too have a question. I came especially running from the class to be there. But let students ask them. Ask you.
I think let students first ask.
Yes, yes.
Also, we have time. Okay, I'm glad, because then some of the questions can actually answer. The question about Rousseau, for example, is important, etc. But
precisely that. Rousseau's question I was coming to.
Okay. I left it out because I realized that I have to delete something.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Come on. Anushka, bolo.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for such a wonderful talk, and it is really, really nice to see all of you, all the students and teachers. Even though it's been 2 months, but I have missed everyone enough. And coming to my question, ma'am, I want to know, since aristocratic women were often viewed as unnatural, were there any instances that they were pitted against the other women, such that the unity of women was thwarted during the course?
Absolutely, it was. Yeah. Okay. Is that the main question? Is there any? Yes. Very clearly, what happened was that aristocratic women were seen as different, very clearly, from the outset. And they were seen as what women should not be. As a matter of fact, think of Marie Antoinette. She had such a difficult life. Her husband could, when she got married, she was 17. Her husband could not consummate the marriage. Everybody in the world knew that. And it was not because she was at fault. Eventually, there was a surgery and he could consummate the marriage. So then she had these children. And she had a difficult life because the courts, everybody had mistresses, and she also had her share of affairs. But the point is that she was not a bad mother. Please remember that. And she was accused of incest. She was accused of incest with her son. And I think, somewhere, I think this tendency in patriarchal societies to blame women, we see this today also. That's why I'm picking it up. That to blame women for everything that goes wrong. And there was no evidence of incest. We all know that she was deemed unnatural. So this word natural, what was natural? Natural was producing children. And Napoleon said, women are children producing machines. Hitler said the same. Remember, all autocratic societies want women to be just mothers. This whole obsession with motherhood is something which I think we have to think very seriously about. because only if sex is destiny, then does motherhood become your destiny. Because, and maybe it's something to do with the development of the human race, but we have a large number of human beings. We don't need everybody to become mothers. As a matter of fact, we need very few people to procreate. But this obsession is a very, very important part of this. And you're absolutely right about this other point, about women being pitted against each other. Women, as you know, if you read feminism, women have not one homogeneous group ever. They cannot be. Let's remember that. So actually what happened was, there is a scholar who's trying to argue that the group of revolutionary the women, that club of revolutionary women was actually very, it was refused, it was not polite, it used to be aggressive, it was very demanding, and Robespierre found it very difficult because in his early life as a radical, he had argued for women's liberty, but he had done it in a kind of gallant way, women, okay, I'm nice to women, I'm a good guy. But eventually what happened to him was that he realized that all women are not polite and nice, that they're not gentle and kind and all of that. So these Republican women were seen eventually also being quite unnatural. I mean, I'm not sure that word was used for them, but not fitting into the feminine categories. And there was also a big tussle between the working women, the women who were marketing women, the women who, because remember, in all these societies, they were the ones who went to the markets. They sold fish buying, chocolate making. So there was a disagreement between the Republican women, and all of them were revolutionaries, and the women who were from the labor classes. And this was a good excuse for the men to put down the revolutionary women. Through that, so in a sense, and that is why even the men who probably would have supported the women otherwise on sort of ideological notions of equality kept quiet in the convention, because they also felt these women are getting a little difficult to handle. And it didn't affect them, no? I mean, all of us know that unless you are affected by something, unless you know what discrimination is, you cannot really, in a sense, fight against it. I mean, theoretically, you may understand it, but as women, we know what it means. And I think that in itself is something which the men sort of who had power there didn't. And of course, Napoleon comes in a completely different tangent. That is a different story. I'm talking about revolutionary men, not about counter-revolutionaries. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. Any particular readings, any work you would recommend for this to get to know more about this?
There's lots of work. I don't know where to start.
So I'll have this discussion with you separately.
Yeah, I'll send you some readings, which I've read recently. I mean, what I read earlier when I used to teach is very different now. But for example, one very interesting reading is about one very interesting kind of work is now emerging is about masculinity. And, the binaries of masculinity and femininity are always there. But actually, this work is more talking about homosocial. It's talking about war and how men may have been, because of the military and all, may have become more masculine. But also that the fraternity part of it became important. So this homosociality is a word which somebody has argued about. So there's very interesting new work. And so, in a sense, this simplistic understanding, I don't think I should say simplistic, which Joan Landis had, for example, of the public and the private. This is now being filled out. Joan Landis did a phenomenal work when she talked about the public and the private. But now it is being filled out through a much more nuanced understanding of the discourses. And that the discourses also had these elements, of homosociality. They had other ways, and how women also were very creative. So the women who were actually doing the economic activities, who were laboring, they then said, we are economic people. You have to support us. So they don't give us political rights, but you have to give us certain other kinds of rights. So there were very creative ways in which women made space for themselves. It's very sad because, apparently before the revolution, women used to run all these, not hotels is not the correct word, these inns and taverns and all of them. And after the Napoleonic Code, they couldn't own its property. They couldn't have bank accounts in their name. They couldn't have witnesses. How can you run a business if you can't go to law court? So women found ways around it. So that is the interesting way. So there was a creativity through which this masculinity and femininity and this whole gendering process itself was manipulated, shall we say, by the people who were affected by it. So,
thank you, ma'am. Thank you once again.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. It's nice to have questions. Okay.
Ankita Singh has it's in the chat box. Shall I read it out?
Yeah, please do. And if I could like to see Ankita.
So Ankita's question is, the women's movement could not reach the ordinary women. Why was it so? Was it the lack of leadership, or was it due to the Catholic conservative society that French had?
Actually, there was no women's movement as such. This ascription of women's movement is not there, by the way. Okay, I mean, I think this whole thing about feminism, first wave, second wave, third wave, all these are attributes which we have put to them. I think the women themselves were thinking of themselves quite differently, and I think that we have to be very careful about that. So I'm not going to say that this was a women's movement. Please. I hope you've understood. I've actually not titled it that way. And I like the way women and the French Revolution is, because it doesn't say feminism and the French Revolution. I think if you're very careful, there's Karen Offen's work. There's a lot of work on this. We can discuss this later. I think ordinary women and the other women did come together on certain issues in the overthrowing the monarchy, in questioning the politics, all of that. But clearly, they lived differently. They were in different spheres, and there was, in that sense, that leadership is not there. Olympe de Gouges is not a leader of women. I think what is happening is, very interestingly, she's visible. And it's very interesting too, when I was reading recently something about it, about women being, like you have the academies, I hope you know, like you have Sahitya Academy model, right? Like that in France, there were academies. There were regional academies, and there's the Paris Academy, which is, of course, a very big thing. But women were getting appointed in the academies before the French Revolution. They were appointed during the period of the French Revolution. After that, after the Napoleonic Code, women were out. So I think it's a very interesting kind of question. I really don't think I can answer it simply in the way that it has been framed, but I hope you understand. So it was not a lack of leadership. I think it was a way that the gyre turned, that it turned against the women. And there was a kind of political leadership which was able to turn it. Napoleon came down very heavy. And he came down heavy because he said we need stability, we need security, we need safety, nation, etc. The nation was being made by Napoleon. Please remember, making of nations is a very difficult thing for women always. Afghanistan women are facing it. And particularly if you have right-wing leadership, women will suffer. Whether you are with them or without them. I think that is the main moral of the story of this. I don't want to say there's a moral, but women, as soon as reaction sets in, women are pulled out. Always. See that. हमारे नेशनल मूवमेंट में गांधी ने तक कहा कि आप आइए नेशनल मूवमेंट में भाग लीजिए फिर वापस चले जाइए वापस चले जाइए घरों में. So I think we have to be very, very careful about this. The Catholic conservative society, I think Catholicism itself is not conservative necessarily. Of course, it has its norms of marriage, etc. But Catholicism was seriously questioned by the French Revolution, by the way. And I think this, you must read Dechristianize, take it very seriously. It was something which was very powerful. Society of the Just, etc. And yet, when France recovered from the revolution, if I were to say that, then it became conservative. And as you know, if you've read your Simone de Beauvoir, what does she say? She talks about how women were the pillars of the Catholic Church later on. And even during the process of de-Christianization, it was women, even revolutionary women, who resisted the de-Christianization. So again, it's a very, to look for a women's movement is very difficult, but to look for women and see how they responded, maybe that's what we have to look at. We have to look at women's own agency within within different discourses, within different segments of society. Let's not look for one women's movement in the world. There's not going to be. There never will. In India, can you see one women's movement? Never. It's not going to be like that. There will always be. Within feminism, there are so many strands. So there will always be. The desire for all women to be together may be important, but women of property are very different from women without property. Women of the upper caste are very different from the women of the lower caste. Remember? So we can't really think of a homogeneous women's movement. That's what I would say. Anyhow, I hope if I've answered the question.
Can I just join in here? Something really interesting that I mean, it's coming out of the question only when you talked about Simone de Beauvoir. Well, somebody who's written that very famous text in 1949, that text becomes a rage 20 years later.
Yeah.
And for Simone de Beauvoir, yes, for her to call herself feminist also took so many years, 1973 or 74. So somewhere the milieu, talking in terms of the environment in France, the warriors was not conducive even when she was writing something so revolutionary for the time. This is, that element is always there, as you say, she herself agreed, women being the pillars of sustenance of Catholicism.
She says she had to go to church every day. She was a believer for a very long time. And the Catholic Church actually was very strong on women. And anti-abortion, so much.
Absolutely, anti-abortion, and through those years, you have to reproduce. The same thing. It was Hitler.
War always produces women as producers of children, and of course, of producers of other things as goods as well. We know in the First World War, the Second World War, women became the primary producers. They ran the machines, they did everything. But you don't take cognizance of that. You only take cognizance of women's productive capacity.
You're right. And if I could just ask the question on Rousseau also. You were showing it that. And how really, I would say, whatever little, impetus there could have been, not of the women's movement, but of larger thinking, seemed to have got retarded by what he had to say. Was that the case, or is it a general idea about women being confined with that?
I think Rousseau is a paradox, actually. It's a contradictory, because Rousseau is also the Enlightenment philosopher of the revolution. So, in a sense, he's the one who's talking about the revolution and women and men and individual liberty, etc. And so, I think what is very interesting about Rousseau is, and maybe, I don't think I can go through that whole process of showing it. I had some very interesting quotations from Rousseau for this, because I think we must try and understand. Remember that he wrote these two books on education of men and women, and so this was a very hot topic of discussion in 18th century France, and but Rousseau's views are very clearly that women and men are made differently, and therefore men and women have to be, in a sense, educated differently. Remember people like Condorcet. Condorcet was one man who supported the women throughout. Okay, he, as a matter of fact, wrote tracts, and he had to go in hiding for a while because of his opinions. And as I said, he didn't speak at the convention eventually because Amar and even Robespierre didn't speak. Robespierre was so powerful at that time, he could have said anything. But the point is that Rousseau himself actually saw this process, and he constructed this natural-unnatural binary, which I think was a part of the medical discourse. right? Remember, I mean, science also goes through very different, interesting phases. So medical discourse, actually, of the 18th and actually from the 17th century onwards, is creating this distinction between men and women, which never existed in the Bible, never existed in the medieval world also. In the medieval world, people believed that men and women had different body parts, right? They had different bodily functions in terms of procreation. Otherwise, men and women were the same. But around the 17th, 18th century, the doctors, and therefore, in a sense, Rousseau is coming from reason, but he's attributing emotion to women. But his own reasoning is coming from a kind of scientific understanding of the body, and therefore they are saying that men and women are different. They're different because women have uteruses. They have hysteria because they have a uterus. That is why it is called hysterectomy. And this is something which goes on with Freud also. Freud also says, so therefore, in a sense, this tradition of the medical science part of it is something which carries on. And so Rousseau, I think, we have to see him like that. Because I know it's as person who looks at women, we can find Rousseau very, very upsetting for us. But I also feel that we have to look at him in a historical context. He's he's like Marx. He's as much a product of his own society as he's revolutionary. So all of us carry those marks of our own growth within us. So we also have our own prejudices or whatever comes from our developmental phases. So I think Rousseau has to be looked at like that. But I think everybody should read Emile and Helmholtz. There's no other answer to it. It's a very interesting debate on nature. And the nature-nurture debate carries on in feminism. It ends in the 80s. With Scott and all of them. Till then, nature-nurture is there. American universities are sort of... I remember when we were students in the 80s, we were reading whether Animal World, women are only supposed to reproduce, and we were very happy to find that there are some situations where the men are supposed to look after the women. But why were we caught in those debates? Because because of nature. The whole thing about nature was so oppressive for women till the 80s that women so you were supposed to be going against the grain till the word natural itself became problematic. It was problematized. So we have to problematize nature and natural. Without doing that, what is nature? What is woman's nature? I mean, those questions, once they came up, then it became different.
I know it's getting very late. Can I ask one question?
Yes, I am okay. Others can leave. I'm very happy. I have an opportunity to speak.
Yes, and we have the opportunity to listen to you.
Okay.
So the question that I want to ask is a little different from what the discussion is going on. What I wanted to ask is, why is it that when they represent liberty or when they represent French nation, they use marijuana? Why do they use a woman? I was reading one argument which says that it's very easy to remove women from the context. So women can be shown as a symbol for something which is common, general. Whereas when you use men, they are into their context or into the background. So you can't remove men from their context, and you can do that. You can use women as a general, homogenized symbols as representing something which is nation, liberty, equality, but you can't use a man. So what do you think? I don't know. I was just thinking, why will you still, when you don't want to give women the right, you don't consider women as citizens, and you don't want to also consider them as citizens, but when you represent and talk about liberty, when you talk about equality, throughout, even in French Revolution, you have all the images of liberty and equality always as a woman. French nation, or many a times, were represented as women. And, why is that? Why are they using women's body? Why are they representing nation via a woman when they don't want to give women a part in the nation, or they don't consider women fit enough to be given a part into this idea of a nation? So, how will you...
I often thought about why some societies have motherlands and some have fatherlands. For example, India has motherland. We also have Bharat Mata. My mother grew up in a nationalist home, so she claimed that she saw Bharat Mata. उनके घर आई भारत माता बताने to tell her father that he's going to be arrested. So it's very interesting how imaginations are also structured by what we believe. So that's important. And I think somewhere the Catholicism is very important in this thing. Of course, along with Catholicism, because of Mary. So this whole word breaks up into Mary and Anne, Mary Anne. So we must remember that, but also remember that even within Christianity, when Christianity was becoming very powerful, even before that, there was always that May Day. Mary Anne actually started. See, what happened was when they started celebrating the French Revolution, the first phase. I'm not even talking about by the Republic. It's very different, as you know. I mean, there's Lynn Hunt has written about the Hercules and that image and that all of that masculine image. But I think what is very interesting is that the maypole was actually the fertility symbol, and the youngest, prettiest woman was chosen as the May Queen. So, there is a long tradition of how women are extremely important for a society. I mean, please remember that in the medieval world, women's importance was very clearly linked to her fecundity and her fertility. Today's world, it may be much less because babies can be produced through test tubes, etc., etc. But actually, women were very, very critical for the reproduction of a society. And I think those traditions are very deep in all societies. I think this whole, in India, of course, the Bharat Mata and the Go have got sort of coalesced together, which is even more problematic now because, but the other thing that, of course, which you yourself suggested yourself is this whole importance of it's good. It's what Satyajit Ray showed in Devi, that you worship the Devi, but you can treat your own woman in whatever way you want to do. So I think there's a separation between the deification and the sort of ordinary quotidian reality of the world. So women, I think you are absolutely right. They can be removed from their context. They don't have that much context about them. They in that sense, I completely agree with you what you are saying, that they can. But I also think that we have to look at these other arguments of the other ways. Just can somebody hold this? I just take it. Hello. बोलिए. आ जाइए. अच्छा जल्दी कराइए, मैं किसी चीज में मीटिंग में हूँ. उनको अलाउ कर दीजिए, F8 में आ जाएंगे. ठीक है, थैंक यू. सेकंड फ्लोर. Sorry. Okay, so I think it's important to understand how there's a tangential relationship between this iconization and the icon is very often. It's easy to iconize somebody and then you can easily dispense with that person. I think this happened to Gandhi also. We iconized him and then now we don't need him. We've completely finished him. There's no echo of anything that he ever said because it's seen outside our frame. So I think women also, but Shatrupa, there's no simple answer to your question. It's a very. I think we have to look at the long durée. I think it would be very interesting, for example, to look at how Bharat Mata. There's a lot of work on that. How Bharat Mata became an icon. And Mary Anne पे उतना है, काफी कुछ है, but उतना नहीं because.
But I don't know. The same. It's interesting that how women and their bodies can be used. Yeah. The way it can be utilized to represent abstract things. Yeah. So you can easily use them, but you don't want to actually make them part of that entire, dialogue. So they can be used. Their bodies can be used in many ways in that sense. So the way they can be represented, they can be in these concepts. So that was very interesting, the whole argument. So I thought.
No, women, I think this whole argument about representation itself is very interesting. That for example, the whole image of Bharat Mata as the map of India, no? I mean, these very interesting kinds of representations you can find, but men can, I can't think of a man. I don't know about, I've often thought of Germany and Soviet Union, because the fatherland, and I haven't read anything about it. So nobody even thinks about it, no?
Yeah.
So I think
so there should be questions of why you want to call it a motherland. Why a motherland?
Yeah,
because then we are again saying that it's only reproduction. So women equal to reproduction, so nation is equal to motherland. So it's again this kind of relegating it to the only one role of reproduction. That's nothing else that can be given, or no other role that you have.
I believe that patriarchy thinks of women at one level primarily as that. Just one minute.